I'd like to start by thanking Carl Angadi because I'm here today because of him. Surprisingly, he actually has read part of my book. This is a new edition that I'm working on, and the cover on that is Baruch Spinoza, who happens, in my mind, to be about the only... Certainly he was the first person to understand what religion really is. And sadly enough, very few humanists understand that. But maybe we can kick that around a little bit if time permits. Because Carl is a good question asker and he has read part of the book, I'm hoping that he will, when things get a little dull, he'll throw in some good questions to liven things up. But as indicated, we're here today to talk about wisdom groups, or at least that two heads are better than one. And I think focusing on the two-head things is important because many rationalists think they have everything in their head, they've figured it all out, and all they need to do is straighten you out and things are going to go fine. But the reality is human beings are growing in our thinking and understanding, and if we're not open to making changes, then we're really stuck. And I started out my thinking as a young person. I was raised in a Protestant environment, and it didn't take me long to realize that for me somehow that didn't work. Part of that was going to Sunday school, and since we moved around a lot, I went to various Protestant Sunday schools. And the main lesson you get in each lesson is, we are the saved. We are going to go to heaven when we die. Sadly enough, we will all die. Unfortunately, we're the only ones that are going to go to heaven. All the other ones, the church across the street, the down the block, unfortunately, it's terrible, it's awful that it has to happen, but they're going to go to hell. You know, and the first time you hear that, you say, oh, okay, wow, I'm with the chosen people. That's pretty good. But about the sixth time you've heard it, you start saying, now, wait a minute, these are all different groups, because I didn't care what Protestant thing my mom sent me to. And eventually I realized, well, that's part of the BS story, and get used to it. But the two heads thing, in the process of trying to put my ideas down, I started off with the idea, okay, what you do, you read the works of all the wise people that have come before you. They've got things figured out. It's not Christianity, but they've got the answers, and you go with that. But strangely enough, every philosopher I read came to the thing from a different perspective, and trying to figure out, okay, how does this fit together? And so what I decided, okay, you read all the philosophers, you put their thought together, you take the good parts out, leave out the bad part, and you've got the answer. But unfortunately, that doesn't work either. And I realized eventually that putting it together in our own heads requires that we listen to anybody, particularly the people that disagree with you, and particularly the people that say the most opposite kind of thing. Because there gives you a chance to work on that and figure out, okay, how could anybody say this kind of thing? And it gives you a chance to think about it. And so I started to say, okay, what I'm going to have to do is put it all together myself. And what I'll do, I'll write this book with all the right answers, put it out there, and people won't have to go through that long process of doing all those reading. All they have to do is read this and know, and of course, to raise questions, because obviously anybody who writes stuff down has errors, and probably more errors than truths in their stuff, but at least it's a way of guiding thinking. And so I started working on that in college and kept working on it all my life. And eventually I'd get to a place where I said, okay, I'm going to publish the damn thing now. And then I'd read another book, and I said, oh, I've got to include that. This wouldn't be complete without including that. After you've done that enough times, you say, and you keep getting older. That's the thing. The years go on. You say, people die. Maybe I'll be included in that group at some point. And so it's a better idea to put out whatever you've got, like everybody before us did, because that's all they did. They wrote the best they could come up with. And at least I will have made whatever contribution I can. And it was actually one of the Humanist community members, Bob Stevens, who encouraged me to take that step. And a couple more members before that, Richard and Barbara Lau, who, of course, I had all this in my computer, but getting it from a computer into a book is, when you're not familiar with these processes, and probably most of you are, so you won't understand what I'm talking about, but it's a real tough thing to do. And but the point was to write it down the best I could and count on other people to correct it so that it would move in the direction of being the best thing we can come up with at the moment. And that's the approach I've taken. I recently redid the book because I wanted to make a few edits, and part of that was to add the cover of Baruch Spinoza, who, as I mentioned earlier, to my mind, is the first person to really get it right in terms of what religion is about. And his take, religion is about living in a state of well-being, that all of us strive to live with a feeling of well-being. And the furthest we are from that, the more likely we are to say, living is not worth it, boom, and give it up. And of course that happens every day because many people don't have a sustainable feeling that their life has meaning, and as a result they go through life in misery and pain and suffering. And to me what humanism is about is how do we alleviate that? Because if the goal is for each person to have that sense of well-being, how can we create an environment in which that can happen? My own definition of humanism, which I came up in the early days when I was reading stuff and couldn't, what is this really about, is something like this. Humanism is the belief that human beings are the source of meaning and value, and that our morality comes naturally out of our evolutionary history. And to my mind, that lays the foundation to build on. And one of the parts in there, I was an atheist for maybe a week after I gave up Christianity and said, well, obviously there's no God, there's no supernatural thing in the world. Bringing that in is a waste of time. But it didn't take me long to realize, okay, so if there is no God, do I spend the rest of my life convincing other people there is no God and laying out all the arguments why there is no God? Or do I say, to me, human life is most important. How do we build an environment that enhances human life? And that has nothing to do with God. It has to do with humanity. How can we live the best life we can? And it seemed to be important that that's part of our concern. And so when Carl was talking about things in my book, and he mentioned my wisdom group chapter 19, he said, well, that sounds like a different thing to do. Unfortunately, in my past, I had this written script in which I said all the big words I knew and hung them together as the best way I could. And Everybody sat there nodding off. Yeah, okay. So Carl thought, maybe try a different approach. See if we couldn't actually engage the audience rather than put them to sleep. I have apparently a voice that really helps people sleep. And if I talk long enough, they drift away whether they want to or not. It's just beyond their ability. So, and Carl actually said these words, and I'm saying in mine. In my thinking, a wisdom group would bring together interested people to share their dreams, hopes, joys, and enthusiasms to live in and create a better world. This would make sure we have at least two heads. If you get a group, you've got to have at least two heads, right? And none of us can come to any understanding of the whole universe by ourselves. In fact, we wouldn't have made it past 3 weeks if we hadn't had some mother there to give us a little milk to keep our bodies going. And we are all social animals. That's the essence of human beings. We're social animals. We thrive in a supportive environment. And to my mind, that's what we're all looking for. And my fantasy was that humanism would provide those kinds of groups where we could really interact and support each other and be there. Because my vision was, what I saw in Christianity was oftentimes a person would move into a new town. They would go to their local Baptist church, Catholic church, whatever, and they would find their people that they sort of connected with and who would help them get to know the town and understand things and don't go to the wrong plumber and all the things that people need to live well. And my fantasy was that's what a humanist group would do. We would function, we'd be there, people would come in, we would help each other, we would be that supportive thing. Unfortunately, I don't have a good organizational talent. That's one of my big deficiencies, and I wasn't able to help that happen very well. But you guys are still going, and that's an important thing, because some of you know each other for 40 years or even maybe more, and that is important for humanists. But at any rate, on the two heads thing, and I realize many of you have thought things through and you're satisfied with what you've come to, and you're okay with that. You're putting your energies elsewhere. But the thought that Carl brought up, the idea of wisdom groups, I thought, okay, are there people who are still chewing on stuff and trying to get around something that's bothering them that could better be done in a cooperative environment? That is, a small group which would talk together and share and think. And I've never really had that, even though certainly being around other humanists, you get all kinds of ideas that stimulate your mind and open up other doors. But we hadn't had anything like that in the humanist community. So I'm sort of throwing out, and it's more of an idea. I don't even know if I could support it at this point. I've been diagnosed with bladder cancer, and I'll be going through a big treatment program for 6 weeks, 4 days a week kind of thing. So my time is going to be a little bit caught up in that process for a while. But I'll start off by asking, what would keep you, that is you sitting there in that chair, what would keep you from taking part in such a group other than place and time of meeting? In other words, if such a group were set up, what would keep you from participating in it? You, not your neighbor, your wife or husband. What would keep you from participating in such a group other than the time and place, which obviously are important factors? Now, I think you all know that when you want the floor, you raise your hand and somebody brings you a mic and you talk into it with your mouth very close to the mouthpiece, otherwise you're mumbling and nobody hears what you're saying. And theoretically, you only talk if you have the mic. And Carl Angadi has the mic, and if anybody wants to answer my question, if you don't feel moved to answer the question, that's okay. What the hell, you're only a human being. Does anybody feel moved to answer that question for themselves? Here comes Carl with the mic.
So what would prevent me from attending such a group? And I think that, as I think back on my life, I've had periods where I've had focus on different things. And right now I've got a particular focus, something I think about all the time and wonder what I can do to act on that. And if this group had a different focus than where I was right now, then I would be less inclined to attend.
That's great. Would you mind saying what your focus is right now?
My focus right now is climate and doing remediation to get the planet back to a healthy state.
I'd say that's a fantastic way to be spending some energy, and it's sad to see the universe we live in now in which some people aren't willing to admit there is such a thing as climate change. Yeah.
Now, I advise you to expand your chapter to a book for a culture today that is really divided. There is isolation of the older people.
Speak more into...
Yeah, there is isolation of the older people, isolation in ethnicity, and isolation in religion. And as you said, all these are part of the social animal. And we need each other. When we think of religion, religion is value reforms. It's a moralist institution, and they add to it extraordinary powers. But they all came to change the values of the time. So that we have all these things sharing together beside our instinct. We're social animal like any other animals. We need each other. This isolation mechanism that is established today in the culture is extremely dangerous.
How would that prevent you from taking part in a group to where you'd all bring your ideas and thinking and trying to help each other move on?
Definitely it's helpful, but it should be experimental. We all have to experiment in it and see whether it's fulfilling the goal of the group or not.
Of course. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dick Hewitson, and what I want to say is absolutely nothing would keep me from going to that group except for time and place, which is a constant problem for me because of mobility problems. But it sounds wonderful to me. Thank you.
Yeah, transportation. I can see where transportation would be a big issue. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's encouraging.
Sorry. Hi, Ruben. I would enjoy coming to such a group, but I think that what would happen is that I would come once, and then I would see whether it seemed to meet a specific need or focus. I'm afraid mine isn't quite as focused as the other gentleman who spoke. So it's more that I feel the need to interact with people and to work on projects together that I think are, improving the world, as you say.
So you're more on doing something rather than thinking about something and trying to get it straight.
Well, right. Like, for example, I think something that the religious communities have that the humanist community does not is, a Bible, right? Like, there's no one
That's why I wrote
text.
the book.
Okay. Well, I'll have to read it and see if it qualifies.
Well, let me say, if you read it, you would be one of the few who got past chapter 4. So.
Well, I suspect I would read it, but whether I would relate to it with the same, whether it would draw the same sort of meaning or structure of meaning that a religious framework does would be a question. And so I think that's what I would be seeking, is sort of a sense of spiritual fulfillment from the group. And, you know, I'm just not sure, why do we humans have to create, you know, a structure that involves a leap of faith in order to have a meaningful structure? And I don't know why that is, but I haven't found one in the humanist framework yet.
That stimulates an important thought in me. Most of us, particularly rational people, think we're in control of our brain and we put it all together and we make decisions and whatever. But my conviction is, and I think that Baruch Spinoza sort of got into this dimension, is we all feel a meaning for our life, which I define as, if we have a meaning for our life, we're willing to put up with all the shit and go on to the next day. Once we don't have that, that's when we go over the bridge, blow our brains out or whatever. And to my mind, we're not aware consciously of what's going on in our brain around that issue. But when we're interacting with somebody, and this is where we misunderstand a lot of arguments, when we're trying to talk to a conservative Christian about the dumbness of their idea, is that for them, that provides the reason to get up in the morning, do their job, and go to sleep calmly at night. And that's at one level, that's really what we're all striving for. But when somebody sort of pokes that, and particularly if they do it in a way that makes us, wow, maybe this isn't right, they're sort of removing that platform that we're standing on, and as a result, that just redoubles our belief in it. So I think we all know, if you're really working with somebody, trying to help them in their thinking, you don't attack their ideas, you help them express their ideas, get more clear what their ideas are, and sometimes in the process of doing that, they get rid of some of the more ridiculous parts, and we all have ridiculous parts of our thinking. We, as rationalists, we're sure we don't, but I assure you, if we talked long enough, it would be obvious that one of us at least wasn't very clear.
You know, I look forward to Bible thumpers coming to the door, because this is one of my few forms of entertainment. Now, what you propose, if that became universal, I wouldn't have any form.
Be over.
Yeah, that's my few forms of entertainment. Thank you otherwise.
Well, fortunately, I think that isn't. Michael, here's that.
Well,
Carl?
there's some others before.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Trying to keep track. By the way, many people think that most of what the Catholic Church does every Sunday is theater.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe you should have taken the other person first, because my thoughts are a little bit jumbled still. But I would probably really not come if it is on some topic like global warming, because I feel like we hear enough about that. I do. Anyway, it's in the news all the time. And I would prefer the meetings, and what you were just talking about a minute ago, and in general, you know, the meaning of life, take off some slice of that. And a little bit, I don't think that this woman was quite saying this, but I'm not sure, but maybe, you know, people are often very isolated from each other. And so topics that kind of relate to that in some way or other, and the meaning of life, and, you know, like what you do if you are isolated to, you know, compensate for that somehow. And sort of more like how we live our lives as, people. That's, okay.
Yeah, no, I
But not something like, not, some of the social topics, I guess you would say, rather than, I prefer like more about relationships and that sort of thing, but I don't know whether to call them social issues, but, like gun control, that interests me a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying these things don't interest me, or
Yeah.
the immigration crisis, but those are topics that they're all over. There's meetings, there's committees, but mainly we just hear about it all the time. Okay, I think I'm repeating myself.
Arthur, I think one of the things that didn't get brought out, that I got from your book anyway, was that these groups, theoretically anyway, would be more like the Royal Society was back when science was evolving. So that people would look at these kinds of issues in a deep way and talk about them. The problem is it sounds elitist, but nonetheless, somewhere along the line, some people have to start thinking in this way and spread the word, so to speak, about how one might do this in reality. And I think the big leap of faith is, can you do that?
Yeah, and let me just throw in a little bit before Michael starts talking on that. My vision in this thing would be that part of setting up this group would be an idea of utilizing my wisdom and time and energy, and I'm sure some of you have put more into this even than I have, as a way to improve the thinking and actually put out something that's worth studying and thinking about and answering questions. Because I try to include in this thing a thing called the 11 Ways of Wisdom, which is, okay, if I'm going to organize my life, how do I do that? And in reading in Buddhism, they had a long list of stuff, but 4 of them caught my attention. I said, okay, those to me make sense. Those are, from my humanist perspective, things that seem right. And so I started with those 4, and I sort of added to them over time till I finally got up to 11. It wasn't an effort to get beyond 10 because what the heck, 9, 10, 11, it's all the same. But at any rate, so the idea that this would be part of the program, and it wouldn't be talking about different things like global warming and whatever. It's about how do we get beneath that, and how do we create an environment where global warming would be recognizing having the potential to wipe out the species. And not in 1,000 years. It could happen in 10 years at the rate we're going. And my own fantasy is part of the reason we haven't gotten any message from smart species out there in the universe is, my guess is, no species that can last longer than 10,000 years once they've developed an industrial revolution. Because they have then the power to eliminate themselves, and they may not have the wisdom to figure out how not to do it. Michael.
First, Art, I am very grateful to you that you proposed this idea of wisdom groups, and you in part answered my question about what these groups should be focused in. I am involved in several different groups, maybe too many, which are working on specific issues, whether it's climate change or housing or whatever. But what keeps me up at night is this question that we cannot solve all these problems if we don't learn how to work together. If we don't find the ways to get along and to overcome all these our divisions that prevent us from solving these problems, or even from developing some shared understanding of these problems. If we cannot do this, we are in a severe time crunch. As you said, you may have maybe other 10, 20 years to learn this. And these wisdom groups or something similar, this could be a way how to do this, how to accelerate this process. Because we may not have another millennia for this. And one question that I have is that even if we had such a group within a humanist community or like between like-minded people, it still would be tremendously useful. But I'm thinking about how to scale up these efforts, how to find the ways to involve people with different perspectives into these groups. And at a practical level, besides time and space, it requires many facilitators, many people with organizational skills that unfortunately, like you, many people don't have these skills. So that's one practical question, how to make this.
Yeah, and of course that would be one of the challenges that if such a group were set up is to deal with. How can we expand this kind of effort? Because the saddest thing about most religious groups is they start by saying we have the right answer, and if you want to find the right answer, we'll provide it for you, but don't ask silly questions. And to me, what humanism is about, you accept any person where they are, and if where they are is a dyed-in-the-wool ranting Baptist or whatever, or a Scientologist, you interact at that level because they're trying to straighten their life out. They're trying to get that sense of well-being. And at that level, that group is giving them enough of that they're satisfied. So it's a matter of not trying to tear people down in order to help them build, but to support that effort to expand. Because to my mind, this is getting to what you really believe. It's not that we have the answer and we'll give it to you and then you have it too. It's a matter, each of us have unique parts to contribute to this. And unless we can get those parts in, then we're going off on some kind of a tangent.
I'm Dick again. I have a question for the group. You may not be the right person to answer it. There is a discussion group, I know, within this humanist group, and I'm wondering if that is something like what you are suggesting.
Carl, I think, probably is the best person to answer that. He pays attention.
We have a tendency to just focus on local topics and not on the broader dimensions of a concept like this. It'd be like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but let's say where we are now would be the world is the place where everyone believes that Newton's law is the law of the land, and we're trying to get to quantum physics. I'm trying to think of another analogy for it, because there's a lot of this stuff spread around. It's fragmented, but there's no way to get it going. The main thing, it seems to me, I don't know again, it seems to me, that you would start off with a smaller group and not be so concerned about making a giant group, because you've got to get the little group to grow so that then you can magnify it more and more, as opposed to, boy, this is a challenge. I mean, believe me, you have to be a real believer. I think you mentioned those communities like, Harmony, and, essentially somebody wrote a book. You might go into that a little bit. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Well, yeah, what's the name of the groups?
Doesn't matter, the Quakers, the Mennonites.
Well, particularly during the period of 1800s, 1900s, there were the effort to build communities that persons could come into, and because as human beings we do have that sense of aloneness and not being connected, and that's something each of us goes through, some more than others. Males probably don't do it enough because they know how to divert their brains and not think about serious things. But the point of it is to communes. Commune was the term, and to my mind, the goal. To my mind, the goal is to build something like a commune in which we all would participate and be part of, and not suffer the consequences of exploitative capitalism, which unfortunately has become really bad. And as some of you know, there are top capitalists who are saying, okay, profit is not in fact the proper goal for a corporation. A corporation needs to feel responsible for the workers, for the community, and take part in that. And that's sort of along what benefit corporations would do, but it was amazing to me that these top capitalists, in working together, came up with that point. And I think that's a very positive step, because to exploit a person just because you have the power to do it is not a way, to my mind, to live a nurturing life, a life that's even worth living. But just following up on that, in my mind, human beings, our species, has the genetic capability to produce what I call the conscience challenged. These are the people who, under the worst of conditions, will become psychopaths. And psychopaths' brains are structured in such a way that they don't feel compassion for another person who is suffering or whatever. But that doesn't mean just because they can't innately feel that, I think they can learn to deal with it. And it's a positive thing to do. And to my mind, that would be part of the process. Because if you take 2% of men and 1% of women in the United States are psychopaths, that's a very small percentage. But who are that 1% and 2%? Some of you may be sitting here already, but I assure you the 98% of people out there, okay, they have basically part of this is a high intelligence, part of it is high motivation, and many of them want to be leaders, and they do the things to become leaders. So who are our leaders? The persons basically who are conscience challenged. Now, being conscience challenged doesn't mean that you're going to be a bad person and a steal and thief and whatever. There's just a propensity in that direction, and if you're raised in a loving family who are there for you, and you see that and you live in that, then you grow up, even though if you don't have it in your genes, you have it in your memes, you have it in your ideas, and you recognize helping each other is a better way to live than exploiting somebody just because you have the ability to do it. But
okay. Two comments on things that were said previously. One is that atheism and humanism are not mutually exclusive. Another is that religion, by your definition, is not exclusively Christian or theist. And finally, a question is that's more specific on something that was already raised, and that is, how do our free thought and inquiring minds groups differ from what you have in mind for wisdom groups? These are small groups. Usually they max out at 10 because more than that it becomes very hard for people to participate and ask questions. It becomes infrequent opportunities to speak. But how would they differ from your wisdom groups?
Well, I don't know that they would. You asked some very good questions. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good question answerer if the question gets over 4 words. But it's a matter that I think most humanists have all kinds of questions. I mean, that's how they got there. And I agree with you. It's hard for me to imagine a humanist who believes in God. Now, if you define a person who doesn't believe in God as an atheist, then you would say, oh, well, you're an atheist. You're not a humanist, you're an atheist. And that's, to my mind, where the break comes. How do you define yourself? If you define yourself as a person who doesn't believe in God, and therefore that's the most important thing to you, then that's it. But if you define yourself as a person who cares about humanity and other humans, and how can we support each other, how can we build things together, because obviously together we can do a lot of things we can't do alone. And that's of course what the value of groups are. Unfortunately, humanists are not very good at building organizations, partially because organizations, if you have a strong leader who says, do this, you sweep the floor, you here, we get a meeting, whatever, you can have a group that looks like it's functioning, but if you have to vote on, well, who has to sweep the floor, who gets to whatever, you're just going around circles. So that's in the realm of organization, and from, if you follow my experience, you see I'm not a very good organizer, so I'm certainly not the person to tell you how to do that.
So I'm still Higher Reuben, and I wanted to ask you, I'm a little confused about the purpose of the wisdom groups as distinct from discussion groups and so on. So it occurs to me that if the goal is to sort of overcome our individual differences in the meanings that we have ascribed to our lives and to the world in order to improve the world from a humanistic perspective, which I define as caring about the welfare of humans and their environment, then I think we could, to overcome that, I think it would be interesting for a group to have a focus such as a text, and perhaps people could agree that such a text might be your book or whatever, but then to actually discuss not just anything in general or whatever occurs to us or whatever is locally important at the time, but first to focus on whether we can at least agree on a system of trying to integrate meaning or overcome the fact that we all individually ascribe different meanings. And I don't think humanism and atheism are the same at all, and so I guess there is a large number of us, I'm sure, who have no idea whether there's a God or anything else in the domain outside of our world that we know and perceive. So, so that whole group of people, and I suspect there are a lot of people in this room in that category who don't know what there is, we would not feel comfortable calling ourselves, definite atheists, and so I guess I would feel more comfortable with that definition. Yeah. Anyway, I wonder if you think a text-focused discussion group might then lead to something else.
Well, my point of the wisdom group I was thinking of were persons who had read the book and saw value in it, and were willing to figure out how to correct its errors. Because I assure you, there are many errors in here, and correcting them would be of value. And part of it would be that process. It's also, let me see if I can say this in an understandable way. Once upon a thing, there was a thing called astrology. There was a thing called alchemy. Those things had a spiritual foundation. They depended on spirits in order to understand what was going on. But as those individuals who were interested in those got into it, they began to see a naturalistic foundation. It was the universe as it really is, rather than these words you apply that in reality don't fit. And to my mind, see, I take science as the search for knowledge. No, science is a, let me see if I can remember what. Let me say it the other way around. Religion is the search for meaning. Now there you'll throw out half the free thought people because there is no meaning. You talk about meaning, that's just a foolish way to go about it. But the point is, when you bring in Spinoza's idea of well-being, a feeling of well-being, and to my mind, meaning and well-being are part of that whole thing that we all have. The fact, because when, as I've probably said before, when we lack meaning for our life, as I define it, then we end our life. So if you haven't ended your life, and you're sitting there in the room, you have meaning for your life. It may be a lousy meaning, it may be one that you wish you could give up and move on, but the point of it is you've done the best you can with what you had to work with, which is what all of us have done. And God, it's terrible when your brain won't produce the obvious. I'm trying to give you what I see as the correct definition of science. And
Search for congruence as you defined it?
no, it's a very simple thing. You know, once upon a time, science was the search for knowledge, and there was the belief that when something was learned, that then it was true, and that's the way it is. And as a result, let me give a little support here to this organization. See if we can keep them going for another week. Oh well, hopefully it'll come back. But that's a measure of where my brain is at this moment in life. But my idea was that there's enough errors in this book, and there's enough. Okay, how do we actually do that? That would be part of what a wisdom group would deal with. Now, how they would do it, I don't have that laid out because I don't have those skills.
What about like hiring a CEO or something? Excuse me, I don't have the
Would you repeat it, Arthur? She doesn't have the mic.
Yeah. Did you say hire a CTO? Fantastic idea. And for $1 million, you can get some pretty good CTOs. Not the top level, because they get $60 million a year. But you know, some of the sort of people on the way there. Unfortunately, and again, that was part of my fantasy. I started out working for the American Humanist Association, and I worked with chapters all over the U.S., and I'd see fantastic groups working, and then all of a sudden, they disappear. And I said, this is terrible, because if I believe that humanism is the answer, I've got to believe local groups are an essential part of that. But if we can't get a local group to work, then something's missing. And so I decided to, one of the board members of the American Humanist Association, Bob Erdman, suggested, okay, how about you come to San Jose as our executive director. We will pay you money, and I have some people who are willing to contribute $10 a month to your salary, and all we need to do is get enough of those. Well, we finally got maybe 4 or 5 people, so we get $50 a month. You know, and hell, for a salary for a beginning person, that's not so bad. So at any rate, but being a little dumb and committed, I decided to come to San Jose and work with the model of a paid administrator who would do the grunt work in an organization, because the normal humanist doesn't want to do the grunt work. They'll give you ideas. Well, now if you do that, this is going to work out. And if you just do this, but unfortunately, who's the you? And if there aren't any yous in the group, then you're in trouble. But at any rate, that's history. And I'm sorry, the lady in the back, I think, has the mic.
Oh.
Remember, speak close into the mic.
Oh, okay. This may not be relevant. I apologize, Arthur.
No,
I
no,
haven't.
it's going to be relevant, I assure you, and you're going to be surprised how relevant it is.
Okay, I haven't read your book or even had a chance to.
Nobody else has except Carl, so don't
I
worry.
didn't even have a chance to Google. I only got an email this morning and ran for the bus to get here. So I'm a little confused about this whole question of faith or atheism, because I think it's irrelevant because
Relevant, yeah.
yeah, because
Or
I
irrelevant.
don't think secular humanism and faith are incompatible, because at their core, any faith is about the golden rule, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or love thy neighbor as thyself. Everything else is just padding, right? So I think secular humanism can agree upon certain principles, and if this is about enlightened community organizing, then you just have to agree on that principle in that instance. For instance, you could be for climate, for carbon-free Mountain View, but not agree on other things, because science changes according to the facts or the circumstances, whatever input you get. So that's the difference, with science. So I guess I think the whole atheism question is a detour, and I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly what are you trying to organize and what are you trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of decoy. But let me confront something you say, which I'm sure most of the people in this room will agree with, but which I think is really a wrong way of reckoning it. Everything we believe, everything we're involved in, is based on faith. Faith is underneath every assumption, every quorum, whatever. And free thinkers refuse to recognize that, and that's part of what causes difficulty in communication. And that can go a lot of ways if we wanted to divert our program. But anyway, okay, a man with the mic.
Yeah, I just thought I'd share a definition of science that I just looked up. It's the systematic study of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment.
That's a good definition. Mine's better, but since I can't think of it, it doesn't matter.
Look it up in your book, Art.
I should.
When I see the purpose of wisdom groups, all they have to do, this is a kind of a mantra, what trumps what? In all the discussions, you have to have priorities. What trumps what? And I assure you that's spelled with a small t.
Okay. I was trying to see, can I fight?
Yeah, that brings up a discussion of ethics, right?
Yeah, I want to know how much are you including the populace, the common people who are really more emotionally directed? And if you attack them on religion, they'll attack you back. So you're a loser
Let me say
here.
this about that. To attack the common, okay, I have all kinds of bullshit in here, which even I couldn't achieve. And I do put myself up there, maybe not the real top, but you're up there in the top 50%. But it's a matter of having a vision. What are you striving for, whether you achieve it or not? And like the 11 ways of wisdom is about how to behave, what is underneath our behavior, what are we really striving for, and how that would function in a society if we all were able to do that. So we don't throw out. See, in my fantasy, somebody who has a genetic disability in which they are not able to do bodily functions is a real resource for the humanity. Because by studying that person and finding out what's going on in their body that they aren't able to assimilate that protein or whatever the hell it is, gives you a way to deal with things at a deeper level than you are just by your common experience and saying, well, don't eat those foods or don't do this or whatever.
But how do you reach the core of those people if you're describing them as mentally defected or something of the sort? You're starting with a bad statement in a way.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't call them a mental defective.
Well,
I'd
but
say
you're
they're
telling
opportunities
us.
for humanity.
We have to reach the lower classes, that's what I mean, because the lower classes are extremely important. They are more in number, and besides, if there is a revolution, they will be very powerful, very powerful.
Well, you get us into some interesting areas, but I'm not going to tackle those things right now because I'm sure this thing is going to end very soon. At least I hope it.
Trump got 60 million votes, and he may still get in again.
You got that
I wish you luck.
Hey, I'm going to need all the luck I can get.
I just like to say it's after 12 o'clock, and the first time you asked for questions, we've been talking ever since. And I think it's time to get back to what more you want to say to us. And I think all the discussion here may show what we could do in if I got the word, wisdom group? Whatever. Okay, thank you.
You said the search for
Well, let me just say one little word. Something I'm currently adding to my book is a thing called The Power of Stories, From Eden to Utopia, in which I say one of the serious deficiencies of Christianity, Muslim, and Jewish is punishment. I say punishment is wrong. It leads always to bad effects, and we need to find better ways to deal with bad behavior. And bad behavior comes by helping the person. In other words, you don't punish if you punish a person, you say, we're right, you're wrong, bang, 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 and that goes nowhere. But at any rate, and I do have 4 copies of that, so if anybody, and this goes on and on, this is speech. This is what I could just squeeze it in under 59 minutes, solid talking. So if you're into that kind of thing, but okay, somebody has a mic. You're going to use it?
I guess. So I might be missing the point here, but it seems. Oh, go ahead.
Search for congruency is what you said.
Okay, thank you very much. I now have found the answer to my question. Science is the search for congruency. Congruency means everything fits together. And if two things don't fit together, then you try to figure out why. And to my mind, that's what science really is. But many scientists would say, they would tell me all the good reasons why that's not true. But I'd eventually live them longer than them, and then I'd be right. Okay,
I would say that that makes sense.
thank you. That's a good start.
Thank you. So it seems to me that the one advantage that religion has over groups like this is that there is this large group of people who come from all different walks of life who just have this one thing in common, that are compelled to show up at the same place at the same time on a weekly basis. So when there's a number of people that see one another weekly, if not more often, then you can't help but build a community just out of familiarity with those people. So since there's nothing that makes humanists or atheists or agnostics come together, there isn't this overall force that says this is what you have to do every Saturday or every Sunday, then it's harder to build this sense of community. It's harder to have consistent groups.
Yeah. Well, let me just respond to that by saying, first, now this is going to knock half the people in this room off their chair, the Humanist Community of San Jose is a religious organization, and we are entitled to all the benefits and whatevers of any religion. Secondly, at one point somebody gave us $100,000 and we had money to play with, and to do that we hired a professional executive director. He happened to be an ex-Unitarian minister from Palo Alto named Bill Jacobson. And he says, okay, if we're going to have a group, we have to get together enough to have that group spirit and connection and fulfilling our human needs to connect with other people we feel good about being around. So he started our weekly programs. I had tried for 5 years or whatever, but I couldn't pull it off. So we had all kinds of things, encounter groups, sensory awareness, whatever. And so he moved us, and then he died. Can you believe it? It happens. And so then where do you go? But at any rate, I hope I answered your question in a round enough way that you'll have something to think about.
Okay, what I'm going to do is let's thank Arthur for his talk, and I hope you'll just sit down, because I have something I wanted to introduce to the group right after Arthur's done. Anyway, thank you, Arthur.
You're very welcome.